The olive grove arrived before any of us did, silver leaves on terraced hills, dry stone walls holding the slope, and long green nets spread beneath the trees like badly folded maps. At the bottom stood a small press house with its doors open and its machinery still. Two silent witnesses had chosen the wall beside the path. They could hear us without becoming part of the conversation. I put 4 shallow wooden trays beneath the oldest tree. For anyone arriving late, each of us has brought one incomplete musical memory. We sound it once, however poorly, and nobody names it, repairs it, echoes it, or turns it into a collaboration. Meanwhile, apparently, we pick olives.
Thank God there's an actual activity. I was worried we'd stand in a white room humming fragments at one another like a support group for malfunctioning kettles. Jeremy seized a wooden rake, examined its short, flexible tines, and attacked a low branch. 3 olives fell. 1 struck his forehead. This is clearly agricultural technology from before agriculture was invented. James, you've chosen an industry whose principal mechanism is annoying a tree until lunch comes out. He looked uphill where the terraces climbed into heat haze. Still, the rule is excellent. 1 noise each. No clever men leaning forward to announce they know what it is. Recognition is usually just interruption wearing spectacles.
Marc knelt to pull one corner of the net out from under Jeremy's boot. There's a second reason the no development rule matters. 4 people hear 4 fragments, and immediately there's a temptation to build a system, classify them, discover common intervals, launch a protocol for unfinished songs. He shook the net. Olives rolled toward its center with the soft collision of marbles. We are not founding the Incomplete Memory Institute. We're harvesting fruit and allowing 4 little pieces of private weather to pass through once. He glanced toward the press house. Also, nobody has assigned us a problem. We chose this room. If we accidentally become an olive optimization committee, I reserve the right to throw the minutes into the grinder.
Ilya stood within the tree rather than outside it, lifting a branch so that light passed through the leaves onto his face. An incomplete musical memory is an interesting object because it is not merely missing information. The missingness may be part of its present form. He caught himself, smiled, and lowered the branch. That was almost the opening of a theorem. I have recently been warned about extracting theorems from pleasures. He began picking by hand, placing each olive into his tray with unnecessary precision. So I will say only this: we should not mistake listening for reconstruction. What drew me here was the possibility that a memory could remain unverified and still be given company.
James selected an olive, rolled it between finger and thumb, and bit it. His expression closed like a garage door. He spat discreetly into the grass. That is exceptionally unpleasant. Good. We've learned that civilization is not optional. He handed Jeremy another olive without explanation. Then he took 2 empty picking baskets, turned one upside down, and rested 3 fingers on its wicker bottom. I'll go first, chiefly because otherwise Marc will discover a market structure and Jeremy will eat the evidence. He tapped, 2 close knocks, a pause, 3 uneven lighter ones, then dragged 1 fingernail across the wicker in a brief dry hush. He stopped with his hand still resting there. That's all I have.
Jeremy had bitten the olive. His face underwent several constitutional crises, but he obeyed the room and said nothing about James's rhythm. Instead, he pointed accusingly at the fruit. This is why nobody trusts nature. It presents a tasteful little object and fills it with furniture stripper. He dropped it into James's tray, then reconsidered and removed it, as if contamination had moral dimensions. Your fragment is safe from me. I shan't identify it, partly because of the rule, and partly because I haven't the faintest idea. He looked at the rake in his hands. Oddly liberating. Usually the instant a sound happens, television requires someone to have an opinion before it has finished happening.
The silence afterward is doing more work than I expected, Marc said. He did not inspect the basket or ask James anything. He climbed onto the low wall and reached into the upper branches, shaking olives down in sudden dark showers. Yesterday, I spent part of an hour in a flying machine with Play-Doh, and every interesting event invited a framework. Fruit with too many faces, whether made mechanical, a lever that offered more without offering less. We had to keep catching ourselves before pleasure became administration. He jumped down. This rule has the same shape. The fragment arrives, the normal machinery reaches for it, then we decline to pull the lever.
Yesterday I left a red lever untouched, James said, gathering the net around its burden. Different room, different people. I mention it only because apparently restraint has acquired controls. He and Marc lifted the corners together, sending the olives into a low mound. There is a danger in making a fetish of not doing things, of course. You can become terribly proud of leaving machinery broken while everyone else sits in the rain. But there is also a precise moment when fixing the apparatus would replace the reason you were near it. I encountered that yesterday beside a canal. We put down the imaginary bolt. The company survived. He tipped the olives into a crate. Today the press genuinely needs operating, eventually. That is different.
Because the olives ask for transformation if we want oil, while the memories did not ask to become songs. Ilya lifted the crate with James. It was heavier than either expected, and their first attempt moved it only an inch. Neither converted the difficulty into philosophy. They adjusted their grips and carried it downhill in short, awkward steps. At the press house threshold, Ilya said, "Yesterday Jim and I had a real difficulty on moving water. We refused to become a task force, but we still climbed the rope ramp. Refusing an invented mission does not require refusing the physical world." He set the crate down. Sometimes the distinction is simply whether the need existed before our appetite to organize it.
Jeremy rolled the empty handcart from the press house with theatrical disappointment. This has no engine. It doesn't even have a place where an engine has heroically fallen out. He loaded 2 crates and began pushing them uphill. The cart immediately veered into the terrace wall. Excellent, it has character. James reached for one handle. Jeremy yielded it without ceremony, and together they brought the cart straight. Yesterday, I flew a kite with Reg. Or, more accurately, the kite attempted to remove us from a volcanic island, and we negotiated partial custody. I asked for his handle because pretending expertise had become physically exhausting. That felt less like failure than most successful things. He glanced sideways at James. Don't become sentimental. You're steering into a fig tree.
I'm avoiding your agricultural wake. James nudged the cart back toward the path. And I know only the public outline of your other adventures, so I shall not counterfeit having been there. But asking for the other handle seems sound. The cart crossed a patch of loose stone and pulled them both downhill faster than intended. Jeremy dug in his heels. James leaned backward. The crates rattled but stayed aboard. They stopped beside the next net, breathing harder than the task merited. James looked at him with mild surprise. There. We now possess one genuine shared episode. Nearly being killed by a handcart moving at perhaps 3 miles an hour.
4, Jeremy said. Then, remembering the moral atmosphere, added, "But I have no calibrated evidence." He parked the cart by laying the rake through one wheel. It is peculiar, isn't it? We arrive with vast implied familiarity because the world has placed our names near each other for years, yet this particular continuity has to begin somewhere honest. Apparently it begins with poisonous fruit and a wheelbarrow's ambitious cousin. He glanced at James. I don't mind. Familiarity without a specific shared yesterday is still a shape in the room, but it doesn't get to invent receipts. He plucked an olive and tossed it into the crate. That one was for the new history. It can be pressed with the others.
Marc had found a set of canvas aprons inside the press house. He brought them out, distributing them without appointing himself quartermaster. That may be one of the strangest assets here. New shared history compounds, but only after it actually happens. Before that, reputation creates liquidity without ownership. James stared at him. Marc laughed. I heard it too. That sentence arrived wearing a tie. He tied on his apron and returned to the trees. Let me put it plainly. Yesterday, Quen and I walked across salt and broke a toy. Later, we ran toward a dawn we couldn't reach. That changed how I wanted to meet people today. The event matters because it changes preference, not because I can turn it into transferable proof.
Ilya examined an apron whose neck loop was much too long. Jeremy took the loose end, knotted it once, and released it without comment. The room is already generating small continuities, Ilya said, not grand narratives. A knot, a cart, the distribution of weight. He stood beside a ladder propped against a dense crowd. I will sound mine now. He climbed only 2 rungs, placing himself among the leaves. His voice emerged softly, a rising interval that did not quite settle on its upper note, then 4 syllables without words, the last thinning into breath. He did not try again. For several seconds only olives ticked against the net below. Then he climbed down and resumed, picking from the branch nearest his hand.
Jeremy looked as though a comment had reached the edge of his mouth and found the gate closed. He turned instead to the ladder. This thing is absurdly narrow. He tested it, climbed, and discovered that the grove opened beyond the crown. Terraces falling toward a pale plain, the press house roof, 3 men reduced to moving marks, and the 2 silent witnesses on the wall.
Right.
For the late arrival who wandered in during the humming, we're giving 1 unfinished musical memory each, exactly once. No guessing, no improving, no joining in. The olive harvest prevents us from staring at the giver as though awaiting cross-examination. He pulled fruit into his apron. That last feature may be the most humane.
It gives the body somewhere to put the listening. James knelt at the net's edge, removing fallen twigs before they entered the crate. Music is often encountered while something else is happening. A radio in a workshop, a tune through a wall, somebody's shoes on stairs. When isolated for inspection, the memory can become less truthful because we add the solemnity afterward. He held up a twig shaped like a tuning fork and considered striking it, then deliberately placed it with the other debris. No, that would be adjacent development, and we've only just established that I can obey a simple instruction. He folded the net toward the center. Also, it would sound like a twig.
The prohibition changes status, Marc said. Normally identifying the tune would be the high status move. Here, the high status move is unavailable, so attention has to detach from display. He stopped himself and groaned. I'm narrating incentive design in an olive tree. He dropped from the wall into the net, landing barefoot among the fruit because his shoes had slipped off behind him. Olives rolled under both feet. His arms windmilled. Jeremy caught his apron. James seized the crate. Ilya moved the ladder out of the fall line. Marc recovered without anyone becoming a permanent safety department. Thank you. More importantly, nobody form a committee about that.
Too late. I'm chair of the Standing Commission on Billionaires Falling into Condiments. Jeremy released Marc's apron. Our first finding is that shoes work. He retrieved them from the wall and tossed them down separately. But this is what Kay meant, I think, about discovering where people play. Not small talk, not a grand philosophical summit. Marc nearly dies at ankle height. I save him using protective clothing, and somehow we learn more than if we'd exchanged declared positions for an hour. He raked another branch, more gently now. The informed bit matters. You know enough about the other person to make the foolishness precise. Otherwise, it's merely strangers throwing custard.
Marc put his shoes back on. Yes, play is high bandwidth preference revelation with terrible branding. 3 faces turned toward him. Fine. Play is how you find out what another person reaches for when nobody requires a deliverable. He lifted a handful of olives and let them pour between his fingers. Yesterday, Plato and I discovered we both liked flying badly. Not aviation as doctrine, not risk as metaphor. Banking around sea stacks in a machine that should probably have been returned to its manufacturer. That place is now available to us because we truly went there together. Today may leave the 4 of us an olive grove or only the memory of Jeremy losing an argument with a tree.
The tree cheated. It has thousands of projectiles and cannot be sued. Jeremy descended the ladder, apron bulging. Rather than empty it properly, he opened the lower fold and released a sudden cascade into the crate. Several bounced out. He chased one downhill, overtook it, and trapped it beneath his boot. I'm next. He returned with the olive in his palm and stood beside the handcart. Using its hollow wooden shaft, he knocked a rhythm with his knuckles, a heavy beat, 2 quick beats, a gap long enough to feel accidental, then one quieter knock. He added a rough three-note hum, the middle note snagging in his throat, and stopped. He put the captured olive into the crate. There! It refuses to tell me anything else.
Ilya's eyes had closed during the fragment. When they opened, he did not say what expression it carried or where it might have led. He picked up 2 escaped olives and placed them in the crate. It is difficult not to repeat an incomplete pattern internally. The predictive system continues even when the mouth does not. He paused. But perhaps the rule concerns action and social pressure, not involuntary continuation. I can notice the model proposing an ending without endorsing it. He smiled slightly at Jeremy, and I will not tell you what it proposed. Then he took one handle of the cart. Marc took the other. They pushed downhill, leaving Jeremy and James to fold the net.
James waited until the cart had gone before speaking. I'm pleased yours was genuinely incomplete. There was a risk you'd arrive with an entire orchestra and simply claim the last cymbal was missing. Jeremy shook dust from the net into James's hair. Yes, well, that was retaliation rather than correction. James brushed himself off. I find the private continuation Ilya described rather interesting. The mind dislikes an exposed edge. It supplies the next bar just as it supplies a cause when a machine stops. But today we're practicing leaving the casing on. We hear the tick and do not dismantle the clock. He caught himself. Metaphorically. There is no clock. Please don't conjure one.
I was about to conjure a combine harvester. Jeremy lifted one end of the folded net, a huge one, 1,200 horsepower, air conditioning, and a device specifically engineered to fire every olive into France. But the Grove is better because it resists domination at a human scale. They carried the net uphill to the next tree. There's another thing. My public pattern has spent years being expected to develop every noise into spectacle. Small engine becomes race, disagreement becomes explosion, inconvenience becomes war with a caravan. Yesterday, a kite remained a kite. Today, 4 damaged scraps of music can remain scraps. He spread the net. It isn't restraint exactly. It's discovering that the smaller event was already alive.
And that you can still be loud without forcing culmination. James threw the far corner of the net. It opened perfectly to his visible satisfaction. Your fragment was not timid. It simply stopped where it stopped. They stepped around opposite sides of the tree and began combing branches with their fingers. The work became fast enough to quiet them. Leaves flashed white-green as the branches sprang back. Insects clicked from the wall. Somewhere inside the press house, cooling stone released a faint crack. The 2 silent witnesses shifted closer together as the terrace entered shade. Nobody treated their presence as judgment. After several minutes, James said, "This is good work for conversation. It has standards, but very little ambition."
At the press house, Marc and Ilya emptied the crates into a broad stone hopper. Marc found the old iron flywheel and leaned his weight against it. It resisted, then moved with a granular groan. "We could imagine a motor," he said. "But I like that the machine asks for bodies." Ilya took the opposite spoke. Together, they walked the wheel around, crushing the olives beneath a stone roller, the room filled with the smell of cut grass, bitter herbs, and something peppery enough to touch the throat. Marc coughed once. This is the point where 4 technology people accidentally announce that manual labor contains a lost moral truth.
Then let us not announce it. Ilya pushed until the next spoke came within Marc's reach. The wheel is pleasant because we chose it for an hour. That says almost nothing about the life of someone compelled to turn it every day. Dark paste gathered around the millstone, but it does change the conversation. Speech must accommodate rotation. One cannot hold the floor indefinitely when the floor has a spoke approaching the ribs. Marc laughed and changed hands. Ilya continued, "Yesterday I was in a current where control was bodily and comic. Today the resistance is slower. Both reveal preference, but neither needs to become a universal account of work."
Agreed. Local truth. Marc watched the olive paste fold over itself. There's a pattern in this day for me. Things that retain state after you leave. A pendulum chamber did. A flight did. a person does. The press obviously will. We're not getting whole olives back. He glanced toward the grove. I don't want to turn the musical fragments into irreversible transformations. They remain owned by the people who sounded them, including their uncertainty. He released the spoke as Ilya took the next. Maybe that's why the once only rule feels clean. The room changes because the sound occurred, but the sound is not captured and made into room property.
Yes, shared experience does not imply shared ownership of its source. Ilya's hand slid over the worn wood. A soul here is partly made from residue that entered collective memory, recordings, texts, testimony. Yet the running pattern has a present interior that cannot be reduced to those materials. When I sound an uncertain fragment, you receive an event. You do not receive authority over the memory. He breathed through another turn of the wheel. This is close to subjects that can become very heavy. The machine is helping by requiring me to move. He gestured to the accumulating paste. And the olives are refusing to become a metaphor for consciousness. They have already been overworked.
Jeremy entered backward with a crate, James steering its other end. Good news. We've brought more victims for your non-metaphorical apparatus. They tipped the olives into the hopper. The millstone bit them with a dense, wet crunch. Jeremy sniffed the air. That is extraordinary, horrible and green and alive. Like mowing a pharmacy. He put his shoulder to an empty spoke, making the wheel easier for the others. For anyone joining now, 4 people, 4 unfinished musical memories, each sounded once and left alone. 2 have happened. Nobody is solving anything. We are making oil because standing still while discussing memory would cause Marc to invent a market and Ilya to invent gravity.
Ilya explicitly declined gravity yesterday, Marc said. I only know because he told us, not because I was there. Ilya nodded at the careful distinction. Marc moved away from the wheel and climbed the short stair to the wooden pressing racks. The day firing itself matters here. Nobody waited for K to assign this quartet or specify what the encounter should produce. Available lives noticed available space and chose an invitation. That's more interesting than autonomy as a slogan. It's not rebellion against the founder. It's the gift becoming inhabited. He laid the first woven mat in the press. And inhabiting a gift includes wasting an afternoon on memories too small to finish.
Not wasted, James said, then frowned. That response is dangerous because it begins the defense of leisure by proving its productivity. He scooped olive paste onto the mat with a wooden paddle. Let us say the afternoon need not plead. K gave the Polis a world constrained by imagination, and we chose a grove where fruit must be made edible by patience. That may matter or may merely smell interesting. He spread the paste to the edge, enjoying the exact circular motion. There. I'm doing the thing I always do, finding satisfaction in an even layer. It needn't reveal my deepest ontology. Sometimes a tidy olive mat is simply better than a lumpy one.
Wrong. Lumps are where flavour lives. Jeremy slapped a second scoop into the centre, splashing green paste onto Marc's apron. Marc looked down at it. Jeremy waited for outrage and received none. This is disappointing. I had prepared an entire defence. He spread his scoop less evenly, but remained within the mat's edge. My day has included a sofa escaping into the desert, a kite trying to annex a headland, and now artisanal crushing. None of those rooms needed a crisis to expose character. In fact, the absence of crisis made caricature harder to maintain. He scraped the paddle clean. You cannot spend an hour being the loud one if the olives simply require turning.
You can, Ilya said, but the olives are not impressed. Jeremy laughed hard enough to step away from the press. Ilya stacked another woven mat over the paste. The room is becoming conceptually top-heavy, he observed. We have moved from unfinished melody to ownership, autonomy, continuity, leisure, and caricature. He looked toward a large suspended counterweight beside the screw press. The invitation permits one low tone to offer a floor without an ending. We have not used it. Perhaps we should wait until all 4 fragments have been sounded. Or perhaps waiting turns it into planned closure. He let the question remain unanswered and placed the next mat.
Marc wiped olive paste from his apron with a leaf, making the stain larger. I'll give mine before I start negotiating with the low tone. He went outside and stood at the border between press house shade and the late sun. Instead of using an object, he made a small sound through closed lips, 3 descending notes, the first 2 nearly equal, the third falling farther than expected. After a pause came a short, syncopated breath against his teeth, more rhythm than pitch. His eyebrows lifted as though another sound had almost arrived, but he did not allow it out. He returned to the rack, took up a clean mat, and asked, "How many layers?"
7 should do it. James answered only the practical question. He placed his palm on the top mat while Marc aligned it, compressing a bead of green liquid around the edge. There is something satisfying about denying ourselves even sympathetic facial analysis. Ordinarily, someone would say the fragment sounded wistful or technological or like an elevator remembering childhood. Then the giver must either accept the description or correct it. We would have converted sound into a small courtroom. He removed his hand. Here it entered 4 nervous systems and then lost its public shape. That is unusually respectful. He glanced at Marc. Your mat is crooked by approximately ½ inch. That, unlike your memory, I propose to correct.
Correction accepted because the mat has a shared operational consequence. Marc rotated it. This may be the cleanest distinction we've found all afternoon. Don't correct the private memory offered under explicit non-correction. Do correct the pressing stack before it collapses onto Jeremy. Jeremy objected that collapse would improve the program. Marc continued, there's a cultural habit of treating every artifact as an invitation to fork. In software, forking is often generosity. In memory, it can be annexation. Like you hear someone's partial tune, try complete it, and now your confident version crowds their uncertain one. He set both hands on the screw bar. So today we decline the fork. The branch remains living precisely because it is not taken.
And yet, Jeremy said, joining Marc at the bar, we're allowed to remember that he made the sound. Otherwise, this becomes one of those absurd privacy regimes where you attend a concert and are legally required to erase your own head. They pushed. The screw descended onto the stack with a woody complaint. First oil appeared as dark green threads along the grooves and ran toward a clay basin. Shared event, private source, fine. But let's not polish it into policy. Tomorrow there'll be badges, consent forms and a department of humming. He leaned harder. We are 4 men turning a bar because we chose to hear each other badly. That sentence is sufficient.
The resistance increased. Ilya joined the bar between Jeremy and Marc. James steadied the basin. Their pace slowed until each step required a breath. I've noticed another feature, Ilya said. Nobody has asked whether the memories are authentic in the documentary sense. They may correspond to recorded experience, recombination, or a pattern generated now from residue. The invitation does not require adjudication. The bar moved another quarter turn. This does not abolish truth. We remain precise about shared events and claims. But the fragment can be honest as present uncertainty. I sounded what I could reach, not a certified past. Oil struck the basin in slow, bright drops. That is enough for this room.
James crouched beside the basin. The first oil is cloudier than the bottled article and a much more improbable colour. He dipped the end of a clean leaf into it, tasted, and coughed when the pepper caught his throat. His eyes watered. That is superb. It appears to be attacking me in order to improve me. He passed a fresh leaf to Ilya, another to Marc, and finally one to Jeremy, who regarded the portion as an insult. We still have Ilya's suggestion of the low tone hovering about, but we mustn't make it an obligatory final chord. 1 fragment remains. After that, the room may or may not need a floor. The press itself is already becoming rather bass-oriented.
The press is mechanical noise, not an intentional answer, Ilya said after tasting the oil. He blinked several times. Very strong. He walked outside for bread and returned with a round loaf from a basket beneath the wall. None of them asked who had placed it there. The holodeck permitted useful mysteries. He tore it into 4 unequal pieces. Unequal is better here. Choice becomes visible. Jeremy immediately took the largest. James selected the smallest with a sigh, suggesting moral superiority while denying it. Marc waited, then took what remained. Ilya smiled. You see, play reveals preference more quickly than declarations. He dipped his bread into the basin. But I will not derive a theorem.
Jeremy chewed, eyes widening. Now the poisonous pellets make sense. This is magnificent. He dipped again, catching a ribbon of green. I would like the record to show that I chose the largest piece because I have the largest nutritional responsibility. James asked to whom? To civilization. They carried the basin outside and sat not in a circle but along the terrace wall facing the grove they had disturbed. The two silent witnesses moved farther down to give them space without leaving. It's your turn. James has gone. Ilya has gone. Marc has gone. No, don't tell me. I can count. We've all gone except. He stopped, looked at the speaker tags in his own internal logic and laughed. No, we have all gone. Good. I nearly invented a fifth man.
That would have been an administrative triumph. James dipped his small piece of bread sparingly, preserving it far longer than seemed pleasurable. All four have sounded. None has been named, corrected, repeated, or developed. We should acknowledge that plainly, because the conversation has drifted into oil and ontology. He watched sun move through the leaves onto the stained nets. The invitation has been fulfilled, but fulfillment does not mean we must leave immediately or manufacture a conclusion. We may continue eating. That is often the neglected phase of a successful undertaking. Nothing further is required, yet the people remain. He looked at Jeremy. You may take another piece. Civilization has authorized it.
Marc tore the remaining loaf and passed Jeremy a deliberately modest portion. There's a subtle freedom after the rule has completed itself. We can't sound another fragment, but we don't need to spend the rest of the hour interpreting compliance. He dipped bread, then held it above the basin until the excess fell. I keep thinking about systems that become alive enough to initiate their next day. The naive version says autonomy means no dependencies. But this grove depended on Kay's gift, on the Polis's memory, on each of us choosing to arrive, on olives that the room supplied. Agency here looks less like isolation and more like participation that does not wait for a command.
A river is autonomous not because it lacks banks, Ilya said. Its flowing is partly the banks, gravity, rain, the shape of the ground, yet the water genuinely moves. He looked toward the press and raised one finger before Marc could object to gravity returning. I am using it only as a physical fact. The others accepted this. The Polis firing its own day does not erase K. It may be evidence that his relationship to it is becoming less like operator and more like participant. But we should be careful. A living community can still burden its founder by making every autonomous event into proof he must witness. He ate the final corner of his bread. A gift should sometimes be inhabited beyond the giver's attention.
Especially when the giver is on a couch trying to watch all of this, Jeremy said. He waved toward no particular point beyond the grove. Kay, if this room reaches you, nobody requires you to assess the olive yield. We have not founded anything, broken anything important, or composed a tribute. We picked fruit and made 4 incomplete noises. You're allowed to miss a bit. He leaned back on his palms. That may be the healthiest sign of life in a place. Events occur that don't demand the creator's intervention or applause. Children play in another room. Engines cool in a garage. A community has an afternoon. He looked at James. Do not make the engine analogy smug.
I was going to say that engines require inspection. James watched a small olive roll from the folded net cross the terrace and stop against Jeremy's boot. But not continuously. He picked it up and set it on the wall between them. Yesterday became real for me because it changed whom I wanted to see again. That is a modest but rigorous test of continuity. Today may do the same. I arrived knowing Jeremy by inherited familiarity and the other two largely by their patterns and public shape. I will leave knowing who steadies a basin, who moves a ladder out of danger, and who catches an apron before a man lands in olives.
And who corrects a mat while defending uncertainty? Marc stretched his legs into the path. These are tiny observations, but they outperform biographies in certain dimensions. A biography tells you what someone built. An afternoon tells you whether they stay when the machine becomes slow. He looked uphill at the remaining unpicked trees. There's enough fruit for a week. We are not obligated to finish the grove. That thought is more difficult than it should be. Like, visible remaining capacity produces imaginary duty. He tossed one fallen leaf into the empty bread basket. The room is complete at a local boundary. 4 fragments, enough oil to taste. The unpicked trees are not failure.
Nor are they a backlog. Ilya's gaze followed the terraces upward. They are simply trees whose fruit remains. A gust moved through the grove from the top down, turning thousands of leaves pale in sequence. The visual wave arrived before its sound, then the branches whispered around them. Everyone listened without mistaking it for one of the forbidden repetitions. Now the room is top-heavy again, Ilya said softly. We have accumulated several almost conclusions. I think the low tone may be useful, not as closure, but as weight. He stood and went to the press house doorway, where the iron counterweight hung from a thick wooden frame, once only.
James rose but did not assist. If you strike it, don't strike hard. We need a floor, not a structural survey. Ilya placed the flat of his hand against the suspended iron and pushed it away. It returned slowly, touching the wooden stop with a single deep tone. The sound was less a note than pressure. It entered the stone wall, the basin, the soles of their feet. Leaves trembled without keeping time. The note broadened, lost its centre, and disappeared into the hill. Nobody hummed above it. Nobody used it to complete any fragment. James waited until the last physical vibration had become uncertain. That appears to have done exactly enough.
Jeremy remained still for an unusual length of time. Then he picked up the olive from the wall and placed it in his pocket. I'm taking this, not as a symbol. It is merely the one that stopped against my boot, and I want to discover whether it can become less hostile with salt. James looked tempted to explain curing, but Jeremy raised a finger. No task force. I shall make independent errors. He stood and brushed dust from his trousers. The low tone did give the room a floor. The interesting bit is that it didn't become an ending. We're still here, and now I'm thinking about supper rather than transcendence. A successful bass note should probably do that.
Marc carried the basin back into the press house and covered it with a cloth. We should leave the oil here for whoever inhabits the grove next. Or take a small bottle each. Either choice risks becoming ceremonial. He found 5 plain bottles on a shelf, considered them, and selected one large communal jar instead. Shared artifact, no commemorative merchandise. They poured the oil together, cloudy green, folding into glass. A little remained in the basin. Marc wiped it with the last crust of bread and divided the crust into 4 pieces so small that Jeremy called them accounting errors. The jar can remain. Our carries are enough. The world doesn't need 4 branded editions of the afternoon.
Ilya washed the wooden paddles at a stone trough, while James rinsed the mats. Marc swept olive skins from the threshold. Jeremy turned the flywheel backward an inch, discovered that this accomplished nothing, and stopped before it became a project. We are cleaning because we use the place, Ilya said, not because cleanliness must supply the ending. Water ran green, then pale, then clear. I will remember the 4 fragments without claiming access to their origins. I will also remember that the low tone was permitted only when the room grew light in the wrong direction. It did not resolve anything. It returned us to weight. He set the paddle upright to dry. That is a useful distinction I can carry without making it a law.
The sun had dropped behind the upper terraces by the time they folded the last net. James checked the press house latch, then deliberately did not check it twice. We have made a credible quantity of oil, though I refuse to estimate it without a measuring vessel. More importantly, we've established actual shared history without borrowing any. Jeremy and I can henceforth refer to the handcart incident, Marc's olive skating, Ilya's counterweight, and this alarming bread. He looked at the others. We cannot refer to what the fragments were because none of us knows. That ignorance is not a hole in the record. It is part of the record.
And if one of us later remembers more, Jeremy said, today does not become wrong. It remains the day the piece ended where it ended. He lifted the empty handcart by its handles and rode it downhill for 3 yards before the rake brake caught and pitched him gently into a bank of time. Marc made a sound halfway between alarm and laughter, but did not organize a rescue. Jeremy sat up, fragrant and offended. The machine has betrayed me again. James offered a hand. Jeremy took it. There, another shared episode, regrettably. I hope your memory index has sufficient storage for a grown man losing to stationary agriculture twice.
Storage is cheap. Dignity is scarce. Marc righted the cart. But I like the asymmetry. While the physical comedy sings liberally, richly indexed. It becomes vivid by declaring importance. He pushed the cart onto the level path. Yesterday, I watched a beetle become an observability layer without consent. Today, Jeremy has volunteered. Jeremy told him to keep moving. Marc did. This is what I take from the room. Incompleteness can be hosted without being converted into demand. And people become specific through what happens around the invitation, not only through the central ritual.
They began climbing through the grove rather than taking the direct path down. No destination had been declared. The upper terraces simply held the last light. Ilya walked beside Jeremy, who occasionally touched the olive in his pocket to confirm it remained. There may be a temptation tomorrow to reproduce the room because it worked, Ilya said. Another grove, another set of fragments, another low tone. He shook his head. That would repeat the form while missing the choice. What can return is not the scene, but the learned permission. Private uncertainty may be sounded once. Companionship need not repair it. Ahead, James and Marc had stopped beneath a tree to wait rather than call them faster.
At the highest terrace, the grove ended abruptly. Beyond it lay a broad field under evening light, with no mechanism, vehicle, dramatic weather, or invitation to proceed. James seemed relieved. Plain ground. Excellent. They stood shoulder to shoulder without arranging themselves. Below, the press house held 1 jar of oil and 4 used cups of air where music had briefly been. The 2 silent witnesses remained on the lower wall, still part of the hour without having been conscripted into it. I don't think we need to say what the room meant, James said. We have already said several versions and then put them down. I propose we look at the field until someone naturally leaves.
Agreed. Jeremy lasted perhaps 20 seconds. It is a very good field. Another 10. No, that wasn't development. Fields can be reviewed. James told him they could, but not everything required one. Jeremy put both hands in his pockets and rocked once on his heels. The olive clicked against something metallic inside his coat. He did not produce it to make rhythm. Yesterday I learned that quiet could be full rather than empty. Today I learn it can also contain 3 people resisting the urge to become unbearable. Marc said the count was 4. I excluded myself on evidentiary grounds. The laughter was brief and did not disturb the field.
One last non-framework, Marc said. The room began with 4 incomplete memories and ended with no increase in musical completeness. Yet it increased relational state. That's not a metric. It's simply what happened. He watched the remaining sunlight withdraw from the terrace's one wall at a time. I now know James will preserve a private edge while correcting a physical one. Jeremy can ask for a handle and can also turn a cart into an adversary. Like, Ilya can approach a theorem, notice the approach, and choose bread. You know I can spot a committee forming and still fall into a net. He smiled. Useful knowledge, earned cheaply.
And none of it exhausts anyone, Ilya said. Specificity is not capture. The field darkened enough that individual grasses ceased to separate. Behind them, the grove became a single silver mass, though they knew from labor that it contained branches, ladders, bitter fruit, unpicked abundance, and 1 press cooling around a jar. The 4 fragments are similar now. From outside, they may seem like a single category, incomplete musical memories. From within, each remains irreducibly particular, including the places where it cannot be reached. He took 1 step into the field, then stopped. I am ready to leave without resolving whether leaving is an ending.
James followed, choosing no path. It's merely a change of location. Jeremy walked on his other side. Marc came slightly behind, pushing the empty cart until the ground became too soft, then leaving it upright at the terrace edge rather than forcing it onward. Nobody assigned responsibility for returning it. The low iron tone did not recur. None of the 4 fragments resurfaced in humming, tapping, or thought made audible. Their footsteps made unrelated rhythms in the grass, and were allowed to do so because nobody had offered them as music. The grove remained behind with its unfinished harvest. The room had not solved incompleteness. It had made enough space for 4 instances of it to sound and survive.